They stripped Fat Girl naked and paraded her through town. Mountain Man wrapped her in his bear skin and roared, "Strip the thief and march her till shame learns her name." Judge Silas Grimwood intoned from the courthouse steps, his gavel a toy in a cruel child's hand. The square of Ironwood, Wyoming, held its breath only long enough to savor the order, then exhaled as jeers. They dragged Verity Vera Goodwin forward, 22, mill worker's forearms, soft waist, chin set against 1,000 small humiliations that had come before this large one. At the edge of the platform, the baker, Agatha Thornton, smiled like a cat at cream. Her son Percival smirked behind her, the sort of man who mistook a woman's refusal for a debt. Rough hands seized at Vera's clothing, buttons pinged into dust like popped seeds. She tried to speak. "I didn't steal. You know I didn't." But the chant swallowed her voice. A placard swung on its twine in the marshal's fist, letters big enough to be read from the gallows. "I am a thief and fat because I am greedy." Someone laughed as if wit had happened. "Faster," Grimwood urged, his smile a thin, performed mercy. "Let the lesson be complete." Vera's breath went thin and hot. Heat rose from the noon-baked boards. Heat pierced the crown of her scalp. She was aware of 1,000 eyes and none that could bear to see. The first layer came away, then the next. Hands, orders, spectacle. She clutched at what remained out of instinct more than hope. "Don't," she said, and it wasn't a plea so much as a boundary, the last fence before a cliff. The crowd, oil smooth with complicity, leaned in. Children stood on crates for a better view. Men who would later call themselves decent shouted the sorts of things they would never dare set to paper. A woman covered her mouth, then uncovered it to whisper. "Make way!" the bailiff barked, and the circle tightened. A sound rolled over the rooftops then, the kind of sound that rearranges the sky. It wasn't the bell, it was a voice, low and immense, a winter storm, finding language. "Enough!" The word struck the square like a thrown anvil. People turned. A man stepped off a freighter's shadow and into the light. He was tall enough to make the judge's balcony look small, shoulders mantled in a gray bearskin whose head rode one broad collarbone like an old friend. Hair the color of straw after rain, beard sun-streaked, eyes like mountain ice thawing only at the edges. Magnus Mag Bearheart, trappers said, who sold pelts twice a year and words far less often. He did not ask permission. He crossed the distance like a river deciding its course and swept the bearskin from his back in one heavy motion. Soft, winter-warm fur fell around Vera's shoulders and down to her ankles, swallowing the square's hunger whole. He cut the twine at her wrists, lifted the placard by 2 fingers, and let it drop to the boards, where it lay face down like a lie. Grimwood found his outrage. "This is lawful chastisement. Stand aside or be held in contempt." Magnus's gaze moved to the judge and did not move back. "I have a higher contempt," he said, voice calm enough to make the calm frightening, "for men who dress malice in ordinances." 2 town guards lunged. He met them without flourish, 1 forearm, 1 step, 1 lesson in the limits of momentum, and the guards learned to sit. The square's courage drained by inches. Magnus turned so only Vera could hear him. "Breathe. You're covered." Her lungs obeyed him before her mind could. Air slipped in. Smoke, yeast, horse, the wild, faint resin where the bear skin had been sown. For the first time since the gavel fell, she felt something other than the crowd. He gathered her to his side and looked out over Ironwood. "I'm walking her out," he told the town, and the way he said it made walking sound like verdict. Where are you listening from? What city? What country? Tell me so I can greet you by name in the next chapter. Ironwood sat in a valley carved by iron, ruled by men who mistook cruelty for order. The clang of the mill never stopped. The air forever smelled of coal, sweat, and rust. To outsiders, it was a hard-working frontier town. To Vera Goodwin, it was a cage that pretended to be civilization. Before that day, Vera's life had been simple and small. She rose before dawn to walk to the textile factory, where she tended the spools until her palms blistered, and came home to a one-room boarding house that smelled of starch and loneliness. Her body, round and solid, made her a subject of endless gossip. "Goodwin eats more than her wages," they whispered, but she ignored them. Dignity, she believed, was not a gift. It was armor you forged yourself. Then came the theft. The baker, Agatha Thornton, had long despised her. Vera had once turned down her son Percival's advances, a man whose perfume was arrogance and cheap rum. The morning after, an empty basket lay on the bakery's counter, and whispers began. A loaf missing. Vera seen passing by. No proof, no witnesses, just the story Agatha spun, sweet as icing and twice as poisonous. When the constable came, Vera did not run. She stood in the doorway of the factory, apron dusted with thread, and said, "I didn't steal." The words meant nothing against the Thorntons' name. They dragged her to the courthouse, where Judge Silas Grimwood presided like a spider in his web. The hearing lasted less than 10 minutes. Grimwood didn't ask questions. He performed a play. "Order must be maintained," he said, looking down his nose. "A thief's punishment should remind the rest of us what hunger truly costs." Vera looked for a single sympathetic face. She found none, only silence and then laughter. The humiliation that followed was no accident. It was spectacle. Grimwood and Agatha planned it well. They wanted a scene the town would never forget, and they got it. After Magnus tore through their false justice and carried Vera from the square, a silence like afterlight lingered. The townspeople scattered, some ashamed, others angry that their entertainment had been stolen. Grimwood barked orders no one obeyed. Outside the gate, Magnus stopped long enough to untie his horse. He lifted Vera into the saddle with one arm as if she weighed nothing. "Head down," he murmured, throwing his coat over her shoulders. "Let's be done with them." The mare's hooves struck sparks on the road as they rode north. The town shrank behind them, its chimneys coughing smoke into a blue sky too pure for what it had seen. Vera didn't speak. She couldn't. The tears she'd held in through the square now spilled in silence, each one warmer than her voice could have been. Magnus said nothing for miles. Only when they reached the ridgeline did he slow. "You from here?" he asked. "Born in Ironwood," she whispered. "Maybe that's the curse." He grunted. "Not any more." The words sank deep. By dusk, they reached a small trading cabin on the edge of the forest. Magnus pushed the door open and lit a lamp. The place smelled of leather, smoke, and solitude. 2 chairs, 1 bed, a table scattered with furs. He set her by the hearth and poured water into a tin cup. "Drink." She obeyed, hands trembling. The warmth of the bear skin still surrounded her. It smelled of pine and rain. "You shouldn't have done that," she said finally. "They'll call you a criminal, too." Magnus shrugged. "Town already calls me that for being alive. Don't change much." "Why did you help me?" He studied her for a long moment, the fire reflected in his eyes. "Because no one else did." Her lip quivered. I was ready to die from shame. You stopped them. I don't even know your name. Magnus Bearheart, Trapper, not much else. Vera Goodwin, she said softly, though I suppose that name's worth dirt now. Magnus leaned forward. Name's not what they take from you, Vera. It's what you give up when you start believing them. She met his gaze, and for the first time, something other than fear moved in her chest. Something fragile, like trust, trying to learn to breathe. Later, when she slept before the fire, Magnus sat awake by the window. Beyond the glass, the pines swayed under a thin moon. He thought of the years he'd spent keeping to the wilderness, away from people and their noise. He told himself he'd done right by staying apart, until today. The image of the girl in the square wouldn't leave him. Her tears, her shaking shoulders, the courage it took to stand and still say, "I didn't steal." He closed his eyes. The mountain wind howled, but he didn't hear it. What he heard was her sob, a sound no man should hear and stay silent through. By dawn, he had decided he would get her away from Ironwood as far as the law and gossip could not reach. After that, she could choose her path. But for now, she would not be alone. The morning broke pale and silent, the mist lying low across the foothills like breath that refused to rise. Magnus saddled his mare while the forest woke around him, ravens calling from the pines, the distant crackle of thawing ice. Vera stood nearby, wrapped in his bearskin cloak, its heavy fur trailing against the grass. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, with the kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot mend. "Eat," Magnus said simply, handing her a hunk of bread and smoked venison. Vera hesitated. "After yesterday, it feels wrong to take anything, like I don't deserve—" "Stop," Magnus interrupted, his tone calm but firm. "You deserve to live. Start there." She took the food quietly, and for the first time since the trial, the world around her didn't feel hostile, only still, only cold. The air carried no judgment, and neither did the man standing beside her. They began their journey northward, toward the high mountains that shadowed Ironwood like sleeping giants. Magnus rode ahead, his posture unbending, while Vera followed on foot when the trail narrowed. Every so often, he slowed his horse and looked back to make sure she hadn't fallen too far behind. He never said it aloud, but his gaze spoke enough. The path wound through tall pines and across streams of melted snow. Vera stumbled often. Her legs were raw from the rough terrain, her feet blistered. Yet every time she thought to ask for rest, she caught the faintest look in Magnus's eyes, steady, patient, unwilling to pity, and somehow that look gave her strength to go on. At midday, they stopped beside a frozen creek. Magnus knelt, cracked the ice with the butt of his knife, and scooped water into his hand. "Drink slow," he said. "Mountain water's cold enough to stop your heart if you rush it." Vera crouched beside him. "How long have you lived out here?" "8 years," he replied without looking up. "That's a long time to be alone." Magnus didn't answer. His silence wasn't harsh. It was the silence of a man who had built walls thick enough to hold back grief. Vera didn't press him further. By afternoon, snow began to fall, not the gentle kind, but hard, wind-driven flakes that stung like sand. Magnus stopped to adjust the packs on the horse and handed Vera a thick wool blanket. "Wrap up," he said. "Storm's coming." She nodded, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "You always know when the weather turns?" He gave a small, humorless smile. "The mountain tells you, you just have to listen." They trudged through the rising wind until the path disappeared under white. Vera's limbs ached, her lips cracked, but Magnus's voice cut through the storm like a guide rope. "Stay behind me. Step where I step." Hours passed. The snow grew deeper, the wind louder. When Vera stumbled, Magnus caught her by the arm before she fell. "You're done for the day," he said, glancing around. "We'll make camp here." He led her beneath an overhang of rock where the snow couldn't reach. With practiced hands, he cleared a space, laid branches, and sparked a fire from flint. Soon the cave glowed orange, the storm raging just beyond its mouth. Vera sank near the fire, trembling. "How can you live like this, so far from everyone?" Magnus sat opposite her, feeding wood into the flames. After a while, the quiet stops feeling empty. It just feels honest. "And people?" she asked softly. He met her gaze across the firelight. "People are noisy. They break what they don't understand." Vera looked down, tears glinting. "Then I suppose I was broken." Magnus's voice gentled. "No. You were surrounded by fools who couldn't see worth when it stood in front of them." The words startled her, firm, unadorned, and kind in their simplicity. She had never heard anyone speak to her that way, not even her family. For a while, they listened to the storm. The fire popped, sending sparks into the darkness. Vera tucked her knees under the bearskin and whispered, "You could have left me there. Why didn't you?" Magnus stared into the flames. "Because I've seen enough of the world's ugliness. I wasn't about to let it win again." "Again?" she asked gently. He didn't reply, only fed the fire another log, but the pain in his eyes answered for him. When the storm finally eased, the forest lay buried under white silence. At dawn, Magnus emerged to test the trail while Vera tended the dying fire. She watched him from the cave mouth, how his movements were measured and certain, how he carried the weight of the wilderness without fighting it. There was something almost reverent in the way he treated the world, as if each gust of wind, each crack of ice, was part of a conversation only he could hear. When he returned, he tossed her a strip of dried meat. "Eat up. We've still got 2 days to my place." "Your cabin?" she asked. He nodded. "High ridge above the timberline. No one comes that far unless they mean to." "Good," she murmured. "Then maybe I can start being someone else." Magnus glanced at her. "Don't start over. Just start again." They broke camp and continued upward. The trail grew steeper, the air thinner, but something inside Vera began to shift. The farther they moved from Ironwood, the lighter her chest felt. Every step was an inch away from shame, an inch toward something she couldn't name yet. By the time the sun sank behind the ridges, she could see smoke curling from a chimney ahead. Magnus's cabin stood against the mountainside, rough-hewn, weathered, but sturdy, like the man himself. He helped her dismount and said quietly, "Welcome home, for now." Vera looked up at the humble shelter, the stacked logs, the stone chimney, the soft plume of smoke rising into the evening sky. It was nothing like the town's brick houses or its polished church bells. It was raw, real, and unpretentious. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was trespassing anywhere. The cabin smelled of cedar smoke, leather, and the faint, comforting musk of pine sap. Vera stood just inside the door, hesitant to move, afraid the moment she did, she might wake from a fragile dream. Magnus brushed past her, Stooping to hang his rifle on a wooden peg near the hearth, he moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had lived alone too long to waste gestures. "Sit," he said, nodding toward a stool near the fire. "You're shaking." She obeyed, though her knees still trembled from the climb. The heat from the hearth licked at her chilled skin, coaxing feeling back into her fingers. On the mantel above the fire sat simple things: a metal cup, a hunting knife, a carved wooden bear. Everything had a place, everything spoke of years spent in silence. Magnus returned from the back room with a wool blanket and a pot of stew. The smell of venison and herbs filled the cabin, and Vera's stomach growled softly. She flushed. He pretended not to notice. "Eat slow," he said, handing her a wooden bowl. Vera took it in both hands, the warmth seeping into her palms. "It's good," she murmured after the first cautious spoonful. Magnus only nodded, cutting himself a slice of bread. The firelight cast deep lines across his face, making him look both younger and older, like a man carved from 2 lifetimes. After they ate, he poured her a tin cup of water. "There's a cot in the back room. You can take it. I'll sleep out here." "You don't have to," he interrupted. "I've done without company for 8 years, Vera. I can manage one more night by the fire." She lowered her eyes. "Thank you for everything." Magnus said nothing, but his shoulders eased a little. The first week was a quiet one. Vera learned the rhythm of the mountain: dawn fires, water from the stream, smoke curling from the chimney like a promise. She swept the floor, mended torn shirts, and found a strange peace in the repetition. The silence that once suffocated her in Ironwood now soothed her here. Magnus was distant, but not unkind. He rose before sunrise and returned with game slung over his shoulder. He never boasted, never complained. When he spoke, it was in short, deliberate sentences, each word earned, not wasted. One afternoon, she watched him from the window as he split logs. His movements were precise, his muscles taut beneath his flannel shirt. Each swing of the axe ended with a clean crack. She had never seen such strength used so gently. When he came inside, his breath clouding in the cold, she said quietly, "You make even chopping wood look easy." He grunted, setting the axe aside. "Hard things get easier when you stop expecting them not to be." It wasn't meant as wisdom, but it sounded like it. On the 8th night, the nightmares came. Vera woke to her own cry, drenched in sweat, heart pounding. She had dreamed of the square again, the jeers, the heat, the shame. In her dream, she was still naked, still walking through a storm of laughter. The door creaked open. Magnus stood there, eyes sharp, even in the dark. "You all right?" She wiped her face. I'm sorry, it's nothing." "Doesn't sound like nothing." He stepped inside, crouching by her cot. "You were shouting." Vera hesitated. They were there again, the crowd. I could feel their eyes on me. Magnus's jaw tightened. "You're safe now. No one's coming through that door." "I know," she whispered, but her voice broke. "But I still feel it, like their hands are still on me." He hesitated, then reached for the heavy bearskin cloak hanging near the cot, the same one he'd used to cover her in the square. He draped it over her shoulders, his touch careful, steady. "Then wear this," he said. "Every time you remember them, remember this too. They stripped you to break you. This," he tapped the fur gently, "means they failed." Vera clutched the bearskin close, the scent of smoke and pine wrapping around her like armor. She looked up at him, eyes wet. "You saved me that day, but I don't think I know how to save myself yet." He met her gaze. "That'll come. The mountain's patient. It waits till you're ready to stand again." And somehow, in that dark room with snow hissing against the shutters, she believed him. Weeks turned into months. Snow melted from the eaves, dripping in slow rhythms like the ticking of a clock. Vera's cheeks grew color again. Her hands grew strong. She learned to gut fish, to bake bread in a cast-iron pot, to whistle back at the mountain birds. Magnus began speaking more. He told her about trapping seasons, about the dangers of avalanches, about the wolves that sometimes followed from afar. In return, she told him small things, about the factory, her mother's old hymn, the sound of a loom at dawn. One morning, she caught him watching her while she hung laundry to dry. "What?" she asked, half smiling. "Didn't think I'd ever hear someone humming in this place again," he said. She blinked. "You had someone here before." He nodded once, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "My wife, Ingrid. She and our son died a long time ago." Vera's breath caught. "I'm sorry." He shrugged, though his eyes betrayed him. "Don't be. The world took what it wanted. I just stopped asking for more." She hesitated. "And yet, you saved me." Magnus looked at her then, and there was something raw in his gaze. "Maybe I was tired of watching it take." Neither spoke after that, but something unseen shifted, like the first crack of ice before a river runs again. That evening, Vera made stew and burned it slightly. Magnus took a bite anyway. "You don't have to pretend it's good," she said, laughing. "I wasn't pretending," he said, deadpan. "I've eaten worse. Once tried boiling pine bark." Vera burst out laughing, a sound so bright that even the cabin seemed to listen. Magnus watched her, his stern features softening in the firelight. "I haven't heard laughter like that in 8 years," he said quietly. Vera tilted her head. "Then maybe you should stop living like you're already dead." His lips curved, the smallest smile, but real. "Maybe I just did." The hearth's light. When night fell, she added another log to the fire. The cabin glowed gold and alive. Magnus sat in his chair, cleaning his rifle, while Vera stitched a tear in her skirt. Outside, the wind moved through the pines like a lullaby. At one point, he looked up and said, almost to himself, "This place feels different now." Vera met his eyes. "Maybe because it's not empty anymore." He nodded. "Maybe." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, the kind that needs no filling. And for the first time since she could remember, Vera felt something she hadn't felt even as a child. Safety. Not because she was hidden or protected or pitied, but because she was seen and still allowed to exist. Spring deepened into the green hush of early summer. The streams ran fast with meltwater, and the air carried the clean bite of pine and thawed earth. Vera had learned the sound of the mountains, the groan of trees and wind, the soft sigh of snow collapsing on itself, the far-off cry of a hawk. For the first time in her life, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like company. She and Magnus worked side by side now. She set snares while he checked the traps farther up the ridge. In the evenings, she mended pelts, and he carved small things from wood, a spoon, a comb, once a tiny bear that made her laugh when he pretended it could growl. They were learning each other's rhythms the way rivers learn their banks, slowly, without asking. But peace, she would learn, was a fragile thing on the frontier. It began one morning when Magnus returned from the trading post sooner than expected. He tossed a burlap sack on the table, flour, salt, bullets, and sat without a word. His jaw worked as if grinding gravel. "What happened?" Vera asked. He looked up, eyes hard. "They're talking about ironwood." Her hand stilled on the dough she'd been kneading. "About me?" He nodded. "A marshal came through, said Judge Grimwood swore you escaped justice. There's a reward now." Vera's throat tightened. "How much?" $50, Magnus said. "Enough to make fools dangerous." She sank onto the stool. "They'll come." "Maybe," he said, "but they'll have to find this place first, and that's not easy." Still, fear crept through her like cold water. The mountain felt endless, yet somehow too small to hide forever. "I can't make you keep me here, Magnus. I'll go if it keeps you safe." He shook his head. "You're not running again, not from liars." That night, while the storm whispered beyond the shutters, Magnus sat by the fire sharpening his knife. The steady scrape filled the cabin until Vera couldn't bear the silence any more. "You never told me what you lost up here," she said softly. "Before me." He didn't look up. "There's nothing to tell." "You lie badly," she said, smiling a little. Magnus set the knife down. The blade gleamed like ice. "Her name was Ingrid. She was my wife." Vera waited. "We built this cabin together," he continued. "She liked the sound of the wind here, said it sang. I went hunting one week, just one, and when I came back, thieves had found the place, took what they wanted, left her and the baby for dead." Vera's breath caught. "The baby?" "Ingrid was heavy with him, our first." He stared into the fire until the flames blurred. "I buried them under the pine by the stream. Haven't left since." "I'm so sorry," Vera whispered. Magnus's voice was low. "Don't be. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead. It only reminds the living what they can't fix." She rose, crossed to him, and laid a trembling hand on his arm. "Then let me remind you of what you still have." He didn't pull away, but his eyes flicked toward her hand as if afraid of its warmth. "Careful, Vera. I'm not the sort men build futures with." She met his gaze steadily. "Neither of us came here for a future. We came to survive. Maybe that's enough." A week later, while Magnus was out hunting, Vera found an envelope wedged under the cabin door, stained by rain, sealed with red wax. Her name was written on it in a hand she recognized, Percival Thornton. Her stomach twisted. She broke the seal with shaking fingers. "Vera, you've made quite a name for yourself. The whole town's talking. The judge has gone mad with embarrassment. But if you come back quietly, I can persuade him to show mercy. You always did know how to be grateful when you tried. Come to the old mill at dusk, alone. You owe me that much. P. Thornton." Vera's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the letter into the fire. Old fear clawed up her throat, but beneath it burned something sharper. Rage. She had lived in terror of that man and his lies. She was done being prey. When Magnus returned, she showed him the letter. He read it, eyes narrowing. "He followed us?" "Or someone told him where to find me," Vera said. "Either way, he's coming." Magnus folded the paper once and fed it to the flames. "Then we'll be ready." They prepared in silence. Magnus checked the rifle, loaded fresh rounds. Vera packed what supplies they could carry, food, matches, blankets. She had no intention of running, but old instincts made her move anyway. As twilight fell, Magnus spoke without turning. "If they come for you, you stay behind me. No arguments." "I'm not helpless," she said. "I won't hide while they hurt you." He gave her a look, half exasperation, half admiration. You're the only woman I've met who argues while loading a shotgun." "And you're the only man who listens," she shot back. Despite the tension, he almost smiled. The first shot came after dark. It shattered the quiet, echoing off the ridge. Glass burst from the window. Magnus shoved Vera to the floor as another bullet thudded into the log wall. "Get down! Get!" he roared, grabbing the rifle. Through the smoke of the fire, she saw shadows moving outside. 3, maybe 4 men. One of them called out, voice mocking, "Come out, mountain man! We just want the girl!" Magnus fired back, the muzzle flash painting the cabin in gold. One shape crumpled, the other scattered. He ducked beside her. "Back door! Go!" "I won't leave you." He seized her shoulders. "I'm not asking." But before she could protest again, a figure appeared in the doorway. Percival, smirking beneath his hat. "Well," he drawled, "isn't this a cozy little den of thieves?" Magnus swung the rifle, but Percival fired first. The bullet grazed Magnus's arm, spinning him sideways. Vera screamed, snatching the iron poker from the fire. Percival advanced. "Move, sweetheart, before I forget how kind I'm feeling." Vera raised the poker, heart hammering. "You've never been kind in your life." He sneered. "Still got that tongue, I see." The rest of his sentence turned into a howl as the poker struck his wrist. The gun fell, clattering. Vera swung again, and this time Magnus was there, his fist like thunder. When it ended, Percival lay unconscious in the dirt, his men scattered into the trees. Magnus bound his wound with torn cloth, grimacing. "He won't be back, not after this." Vera stared at the fallen man. "We should take him to the marshal, end it properly." Magnus looked at her, surprised. "You go back to Ironwood?" "I have to," she said. "I won't live the rest of my life hiding from their lies. Not when I can tell the truth." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll ride with you." That night, as the fire burned low, Vera leaned against the wall, exhaustion pulling at her eyes. Magnus sat across from her, arm bandaged, gaze unreadable. "You didn't freeze," he said quietly. "You stood your ground." "I was tired of being afraid." He nodded once. "Good. Fear's a habit. You just broke it." Vera smiled faintly. "Then maybe there's hope for both of us." Outside, the wind swept down from the peaks, cold, wild, cleansing. Somewhere in the darkness, justice waited, and for the first time, Vera didn't fear facing it. Ironwood had not changed, only the way Vera saw it. The same crooked storefronts, the same courthouse steeple stabbing the gray sky. But the laughter that had once broken her spirit was gone. Windows closed when she rode past. Whispers followed her like wind through grass. But this time she didn't lower her head. Magnus rode beside her, bandaged arm resting on the reins, the rifle strapped across his back. The air between them carried no fear, only purpose. They stopped in front of the courthouse, the place where she had been stripped and shamed. The wooden platform still bore the faint stains of that day, washed but not erased. A few townsfolk gathered, drawn by the sight of the mountain man and the girl they had once condemned. Vera dismounted first. The ground felt strange beneath her boots, like standing on the past. Magnus said quietly, "You don't owe them anything." "I know," she said, "but I owe myself the truth." Inside, Judge Silas Grimwood looked up from his papers, startled. "Goodwin," he said, his voice high and tight. "You dare return here after your lie?" Vera interrupted. "Yes." The room went still. Vera pulled a folded letter from her coat, the written confession of the baker's assistant who had come to her after the fight. The boy had witnessed Percival Thornton stealing the loaf and his mother covering for him. His words were clumsy, but clear. Magnus stepped forward, dropping Percival's revolver on the desk. "He came after her with this," he said. "You can find him in the marshal's office, alive, barely." Grimwood's face drained of color. You attacked a judge's officer?" Magnus's voice was cold steel. "I defended a woman the law tried to destroy." Murmurs rippled through the spectators. Someone near the back whispered, "She told the truth." Another said, "I always knew Thornton boy was no good." Vera stood tall, her voice steady. "You humiliated me in front of this whole town. You let them strip me, beat me, call me names that still echo in my sleep. But I am not here for vengeance. I'm here so no one else will ever stand where I stood." Grimwood slammed his hand on the desk. "Order! This is not a court." "It wasn't the day you sentenced me either," she said. The words cut sharper than any gavel. The marshal entered then, hat in hand. "Judge," he said carefully, "Percival's been arrested. We've taken his statement. He confessed. Said his mother told him to pin it on Miss Goodwin." The judge's mouth opened, then closed. He looked small suddenly, like a man trapped beneath his own shadow. "Miss Goodwin," the marshal continued, "you're cleared of all charges, and you—" He nodded to Magnus. "I owe you an apology on behalf of this town." Magnus shrugged. "Don't thank me. Thank her." Outside, the square filled with people. Vera faced them. The same faces that had once jeered, now pale with shame. For a moment, she considered anger. It would be easy to throw their cruelty back at them, to let it sting the way they'd stung her. But she only said, "You watched and said nothing. That silence was worse than any insult. Don't make that mistake again with anyone." No one spoke. A woman at the edge of the crowd began to cry softly. Someone else bowed his head. The wind carried the sound of church bells from up the hill, a funeral tone for the town's pride. Magnus took Vera's hand. "Ready to leave?" "Yes," she said. "There's nothing left to bury here." They mounted up and rode out of Ironwood. Behind them, the town shrank into a smudge of dust and regret. Ahead, the mountains waited, their peaks blinding in sunlight. At the ridge, where the world fell open in wild expanse, Vera stopped to look back one last time. "I thought I'd never see that place again," she murmured. Magnus said, "Sometimes you have to walk back through the fire to know you're free of it." She turned to him, smiling. "And sometimes you have to walk out with someone who refuses to let you burn." He squeezed her hand. "You done proving the world wrong yet?" "Not even close," she said. They rode on until Ironwood disappeared behind the horizon, replaced by the endless blue of sky and snow. The wind rose around them, cold, clean, alive, and Vera knew this was what redemption sounded like, the sound of two hearts learning to breathe again. Summer came soft to the high country. The mountain's white mantle receded into rivulets that whispered through the pines. Grass climbed through the thawing soil, and wild flowers burned bright against the gray rock. In the small cabin above the ridge, life returned to quiet, the kind that didn't mean loneliness anymore. Magnus patched the roof, humming tunelessly while Vera kneaded dough on the table. Their movements fit together now, the practiced ease of two people who had learned to survive not just beside each other, but with each other. At sunset, they carried supper outside, a stew steaming in the chill air. The peaks turned pink and gold, smoke rose from the chimney like a second horizon. "It's hard to believe that place was real," Vera said, looking toward the valley where Ironwood slept unseen. Sometimes I think I dreamed it all. Magnus sat beside her, elbows on his knees. No dream leaves scars, he said quietly. Vera smiled. Then maybe scars are proof we healed. He turned to her then, and something warm flickered in his eyes. You did more than heal. You stood up to them. You made me believe people could again. She touched his hand. You made me believe I deserved to. They sat like that for a long while, the silence gentle now, filled with the crackle of fire and the far cry of a hawk drifting home. A year later, Ironwood changed. Grimwood was stripped of his title. Agatha Thornton fled west under cover of night. The baker's shop reopened under new hands, and the townsfolk whispered about the day a fat thief had shamed their judge into honesty. But on the mountain, no one cared for their gossip. Vera's garden thrived. Beans, carrots, wild roses climbing the fence. She still wore the bearskin cloak on cold nights, its weight reminding her of the moment the world had begun again. Sometimes she would see Magnus watching her from the doorway, a half-smile beneath his beard, like he still couldn't believe she was real. Once, she said, "You never asked what I'll do next." He shrugged. "I don't plan cages." "And if I stayed?" Magnus's voice softened. "Then I'd build the fire higher." One evening, as the sun fell and their laughter mingled with the wind, Vera looked at him and said, "You know, that day in the square, I thought my life was ending." Magnus's hand brushed hers. Maybe it was, just not the part that mattered. She leaned against him, eyes on the horizon where sky met stone. "Then this," she whispered, "is what began." He nodded, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as the mountain breathed around them. "You're safe here," he said. She smiled, tears warm on her cheeks. "It's home now, if you'll have me." "Always?" The wind carried their laughter up the slopes, scattering it among the trees, a sound stronger than shame, older than cruelty. And in the fading light, the mountain kept its promise, that love, once found, could outlast even the coldest silence. Every story we tell about courage and compassion is a lantern against cruelty. If you've listened this far, thank you for believing that dignity is stronger than shame. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And if you still believe that kindness can change even the hardest hearts, stay with us. Another story waits just beyond the next mountain.